Hello, this is Kim Williams for Intercultural Communication 220, Professor Ames. This is discussion 2 for Group J. I will be answering 3 questions, each question layered with multiple questions within those. The first question is, why do many nations assume they are the most noble, civilized, or virtuous? And I found, according to Lustig and Keister, all cultures teach their members the preferred ways to respond to the world. Cultures also train their members to use the categories of their own cultural experiences when judging the experience of people from other cultures, which I believe to be true. And this makes sense to me that cultures would also influence what is thought to be wrong as well. I've always had this understanding of this concept, though this explanation solidified these ideas and provided a lot of clarity to me. It also never occurred to me when I was reading the examples in the book that the American facility design of the bathroom would evoke disgust in some, just as the tissue example brought out a reaction in me that I didn't really expect. In my job, I really have worked very hard to try to remain very neutral, not and provide a lot of respect to other people, and really try to train myself not to have reactions or emotions. And it was very clear to me that the tissue example evoked a reaction within me that I was unable to control. So I still see that I have a lot of work to do in that area. I am a recruiter for a local hospital, and in that I also have spent years recruiting on physicians in that same hospital. So I've worked with many physicians all over the world and spoken with them from various different countries, and management positions from various different countries and from all over the United States. So I thought that I had really sort of nailed this down, and as soon as the tissue experience example came up, I had an experience within me and a reaction that I really couldn't control. So I felt this to be very interesting. The second part of this question is, what benefits might such an idea provide the rulers of a lot of people if a lot of people embraced it? The book further provides the benefits of ethnocentrism to rulers, and in such examples of the Greeks and the Romans calling outsiders barbarians, which establishes a certain fear in the people. Of course, history provides volumes of examples where people reacted in fear. Maybe the greatest example, and probably one that is of much disdain to the entire world, really, would be that of Hitler and the genocide that followed after the establishment of fear. The second question was about Jack, who was raised to adulthood in culture A, but then moved across the globe and learned the language and practices for culture B so perfectly that most people would think that he was a native. To answer the questions of Jack, who grew up in one culture and then proficiently mastered another culture, to which does he belong? I believe Jack's culture of childhood is too deeply rooted to be wiped away by another, inasmuch I believe to immerse oneself so profoundly in another culture to reach the mastery of passing as a native requires deep commitment. This commitment would take the passing of a fair amount of time and a certain level of embracing the new and letting go of some of the old. I have reached the conclusion that Jack belongs to both cultures. Though both cultures occurred during different periods of time and are separate unto themselves, they both influence Jack's life. what has occurred cannot be undone. They both will influence Jack for the remainder of his years. He belongs to both cultures as they both dwell within Jack. In bringing up what we discussed last week in the metaphors, I believe when we look at the tributary metaphor, it conveys Jack's experience quite well. Two cultures feeding and thus flowing into what has become Jack's cultural experiences, each contributing and offering the wealth of each part to make up the whole. This is a good example of the two tributaries adding to all of who Jack is, as well as influencing his life lessons, personal stereotypes, familial and other contributions that make up who Jack is culturally as a whole. So those two tributaries really come into this larger pool, or bay, if you will, or whatnot. And really, there's a whole lot still in that larger pool, though these are two very large tributaries that definitely make up part of the whole, but there are other things in there as well. The melting pot example symbolizes all of Jack's experience completely melting into one. This doesn't adequately fit to me, as Jack spent his whole childhood in one culture and adulthood in the other. They would, of course, influence one another, but the melting pot to me would be more like spending half of the time in one household or culture and the other half in another, sort of one after the other, simultaneously sort of mixing together or sharing equal time, where both have equal influence and sort of blend and mesh together. So I don't think this quite adequately would describe what Jack's experience was. The tapestry conveys Jack's experience in that both threads would portray the whole of Jack's life, but each coloring the tapestry without completely blending. It is more rigid and pretty much fits Jack's experience quite well, in that you see the beauty of all of these sort of coming together to paint the picture of a whole, but not quite blending, because there was so much time spent in childhood, and then a significant amount of time would have to be established in adulthood. So this would color Jack's life and his experiences and bring in those other contributing factors, but they wouldn't quite blend together because of such a long establishment. And finally, the garden salad conveys Jack's experience because each ingredient of Jack's experience is a complement to the other ingredients. Though mixed together, they never really blend, but rather become better because of the other parts of a whole. This sort of nicely sums it up also, that they both complement one another, they're all separate, but they bring together really the experience as a whole. The last question would be reviewing the forms of racism and which forms are likely to constitute bigger obstacles to intercultural communication than the others. I believe in reviewing these forms of racism that old-fashioned racism is dangerous for many reasons. The most dangerous and probably the biggest obstacle for intercultural communication being the dehumanizing nature of this form of racism. When coupled by the superiority, it makes the challenge of communication really nearly impossible. Building on last week, there isn't really a level of empathy here. Well, actually, there isn't a level of empathy. There isn't interaction, posture, or respect, which are all needed for intercultural communication, which we discussed at length during our chat. With this form of destruction or destructive racism, there isn't a place to begin, as the recipient will not openly accept the view of the racist, displaying the old-fashioned form of racism. I believe in all the other, when you look at the other forms of racism that we looked at in this chapter, all of them can be worked with, and there is a level that can be added and really looked at as a whole, and all have challenges to them because they're all forms of racism, but they don't really provide the same amount of dehumanization and as the old-fashioned racism does. Old-fashioned racism doesn't even give a, you can see why wars break out because of it, why sentiments are so deep, because it really, there is no point or no place really for, when this type of racism is so deeply rooted, really a place for discussion at all. In closing, I'd like to refer to the cultural communication or connections last two sentences regarding the author's cultural experiences. He says, it is a laughable, puny, meaningless thing, and then goes on to say, it is a matter of life and death. In today's world, more than ever, cultures are coming together, and culturally speaking, we need to understand and respect each culture, though it is meaningless in as much in today's world, and historically speaking, with instability, it is a matter of life and death. So it really, as far as the East is the West, this really sums up nicely, and I really took a moment and reread it again, in that when he's discussing what he experienced in going back and forth across the border, that who he is, this really is meaningless and insignificant, but it is also a matter of life and death. It colors and creates who it is, but when we look at it, really, we have to look at each other individually and as a whole. We really have to look at each person and start to understand and have open communication. And really, in this assignment, it allowed me to really delve deep and help me in my personal life, but also in my professional life, to sum up what may still be hidden within myself and how I feel about certain things, and how I can work to better achieve a better understanding and further my communication with other people. I tend to believe that the Bible is absolute and culture is relevant. I found also the supplement to be helpful in understanding this entire assignment as well, and it did influence me quite a lot. I thought myself to be completely benign to racism, even though that sounds actually quite superior in that also when just saying it out loud. But I felt like I had done a good job in being someone who is racially mixed also, and living in sort of two worlds where I really don't identify myself one to the other, but it still shows that there is some work to do. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion chat on Thursday. Thank you.